What is up, everyone, and welcome back to another week of college playoff scenarios. We have ourselves our prediction for the top six this week. I have Georgia at number 1, Michigan number 2. I could put those either or. Michigan did just beat Ohio State, but I will say Georgia did have a rough week last week against Georgia Tech. And I saw there was some struggle there, but it was rivalry week, so we'll give them benefit of the doubt. I saw Alabama struggle. There was a lot of struggling teams. There was some upsets here or there that just eliminated certain teams. But I have Michigan number 2, Washington number 3, Florida State number 4. I don't think that Florida State's better than Washington in the slightest. Florida State just barely passed the Florida Gators. There was a tight one. I know Florida State's out of QB, and we can't put that into account because that's unfair for the rest of the 22 starters that are playing right now, and majority of them were out in the season. We don't discount someone because their offensive tackle went down, etc. I have Oregon above Ohio State in this one just because I think Oregon has been playing a lot better. I would even argue that Oregon is better than Washington, but they have that one loss, so they're holding them back. And I think Ohio State is number 6 over Texas, over Alabama. Texas wins that head-to-head with Alabama, and I think Ohio State is way better than Texas. Texas, I know they just dominated against Texas Tech, but it was Texas Tech. It wasn't anything fancy, and if you look at prior weeks, Texas has been struggling. Moving on to the 7 through 10, this is not going to be all 25. I just wanted to put this in here as perspective to see where other teams might end up. Louisville did get upset, so I think Penn State's going to move up one spot. Louisville's going to be sent back a little bit. Oregon State also lost. They'll get sent back. But I have Texas over Alabama because Texas still has a head-to-head, and they dominated against their rival Texas Tech. Alabama I did see some struggle against Auburn. I know it's a close game, but I have seen years where Alabama goes in there and just dominates. There is a fun time in the Iron Bowl. Moving on to the ACC, there's only one real contender after Louisville's loss last week. They lost to Kentucky. It was a close one, but it still was a loss nonetheless. Florida State has no margin for error. People are already trying to discount Florida State because they lost their QB. If Florida State were to lose against Louisville in the ACC Championship, they're out. They're done. Ohio State would jump them in the bidding war for that 4th spot. So Florida State has no time for error here. They have to beat Louisville if they want to make it to the playoffs. Undefeated teams will get in no matter what, and if they don't, there will be an outcry, and ratings will probably plummet, and college football playoffs don't want that just because undefeated teams deserve the right to be in there. Next, we have the Big 12. This is another one. Texas cannot lose. It will be X2. No X2 has ever made it to the college playoffs ever, and they definitely can't afford to lose against Oklahoma State. I would say that this is probably best case scenario against Oklahoma State because having that rematch against Oklahoma, who knows what would happen. So this is probably best case scenario, maybe even better than the K-State scenario. K-State did lose last week, so they were out of the question. And Oklahoma was sitting there waiting for Oklahoma State, but they ended up taking over in overtime there. But Texas needs to win. If they lose, Alabama jumps them. And I think that if Alabama jumps Texas, I think they would also jump Oregon just because they're still being held back. You know, that wall, that fictitious wall that the Big 12 is holding on to because of that head-to-head. Next, we have the Big 10. There's only one real contender that's guaranteed if they win out, and that's Michigan. Ohio State is praying for other teams that are X1 to lose so they can just hoppity-skip right into the playoffs here. And I put Iowa in here just because that's the team that they're going to be playing, just like I put Oklahoma State. Iowa's going to be playing Michigan. If Michigan loses to Iowa, I think Michigan's out. They're done. It's over. They're unless a miracle happens, they'll be out. Because losing to a 2-loss, 120th ranked in offense Iowa team would be terrible. And then Ohio State would probably, depending on how everything goes, there's still a chance that they could make it even if Iowa were to lose. But you cannot afford to lose to Iowa Hawkeyes in Indianapolis. Ohio State is praying for Texas to lose. They're praying for Florida State to lose. They're praying for Alabama to lose because that would be a 2-loss Alabama, 2-loss Texas. And they're praying for Washington to win because then that'll be a 2-loss Oregon. And then Ohio State can maybe sneak in there because it'll be Georgia undefeated, Washington undefeated, Michigan undefeated. And then, they'll be scurrying in. Ohio State's sitting there praying, asking for a prayer here for them. But that would be crazy. 2 Big Ten teams again for 2 years in a row. Moving on to the Pac-12, Washington wins, they're in. If Washington loses, there is an argument that they are not in because Washington has been struggling the last couple of weeks. I understand Washington's undefeated, and I understand that Washington did beat Oregon, but Oregon outgained them. Oregon outplayed them, and I don't know what magical senses happened that Oregon lost the game, but on paper, Oregon should have won that game. And I think Oregon's a better team than they did were there. So I think that Oregon has a chance to upset. But if you want Ohio State in the championship, you need Washington to beat Oregon. You need them to beat him because you need Oregon with a 2-loss record so then Ohio State can get in. Out of the SEC, we have Alabama, Georgia. If you're rooting for Ohio State, if you want Ohio State in the playoffs, you need Alabama to lose. That's a 2-loss Alabama team, and they're not going to get in because 2-loss teams have never made it. Historically, have never made it into the playoffs ever in their life. But if you don't want Ohio State in there and you want 2 SEC teams, there is a strong argument if Alabama wins, and it's a really close one, Georgia still might end up still being in because the number 1 ranked team, undisputed number 1 ranked team in the league, loses a close one in the championship game. Unless there's another argument, I don't see it because if Alabama wins, then we have 1-loss Alabama, 1-loss Georgia, undefeated Washington, undefeated Florida. Unless all the other undefeateds win, Georgia won't be in. But Alabama is still held up on that crutch. Can we make the argument that Alabama, if they were to win out and Texas wins out, who's getting in? Big 12 champion or the SEC champion? Because that means if Texas is holding that barrier for Alabama, that means Texas is going to jump also Georgia. Like, where is that line going to be crossed if we're going to value that head-to-head? Because if Alabama jumps Texas, that'd be so unfair for that because then they wouldn't value that head-to-head in season at home. Like, Texas came in there and beat Alabama at home. I know they're completely different teams than they were in season, but we have to value the regular season. But with all that being said, it's a lot of hypotheticals then thrown at you, and I think we're gonna see what the committee has on their hands if some crazy stuff does happen. If you in a perfect world, all the undefeateds win, Florida State, Washington, Michigan, Georgia, boom, flat. All undefeated teams in the playoffs. But if any of them lose, sky's the limit for opportunity because now there's a bunch of 1-loss teams trying to jump in place. And Louisville losing definitely helps with that cause because if Louisville would have won against Kentucky and then they beat Florida State would be 1 loss, Louisville would be 1 loss. There would be all this other stuff that would happen in case of that. And if Iowa didn't get screwed with that fair catch, they would also be 1 loss right now. And if they would have beat Michigan, we would have a very, very different conversation. But that's going to be it for this video. Please like and subscribe if you like this kind of content. Peace.